November 24th, 1971, the night before Thanksgiving. A man in a suit walks into Portland International Airport. He pays cash. One-way ticket, no luggage worth mentioning. No ID required. This is 1971, nobody asks. He boards the plane, takes a seat in the very last row, orders a bourbon and soda, lights a cigarette, looks out the window like any other businessman on any other Tuesday. Nobody looks at him twice. 30 minutes into the flight, he passes a note to the flight attendant. She assumes it's a phone number, a pickup attempt. She slides it into her pocket without reading it. He leans over and says quietly, "You better read that." She opens the note. It says, "I have a bomb." And just like that, Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305 belongs to him. This is the story of D.B. Cooper, the only man in history to hijack a commercial airplane, vanish into a storm, and never be found. Not caught, not identified, not even confirmed dead, just gone. The FBI worked this case for 45 years. They interviewed over 800 suspects. They used SR-71 Blackbird spy planes to retrace the flight path. They deployed the most advanced forensic technology available across 5 decades. And as of right now, in 2026, they still don't know who he was. This is that story. November 24th, 1971 was the day before Thanksgiving. Most people on that plane were trying to get home for the holiday. Nobody was paying attention to the quiet man in the back row. His ticket said Dan Cooper, not D.B. Cooper. That name came later from a reporter who misheard the name during a press briefing. The alias stuck. The real name never surfaced. Eyewitnesses described him as a white male, mid-40s, around 6 feet tall. Dark hair, brown eyes, black business suit, white shirt, thin black tie, black raincoat, brown shoes, horn-rimmed sunglasses. He looked like every other man who traveled for work in 1971. That was the point. He was nondescript, forgettable, invisible in the most public place in the world. When flight attendant Florence Schaffner finally read the note, she walked it to the cockpit immediately. The pilot, Captain William Scott, got on the intercom and told passengers there was a mechanical problem. They would need to circle before landing. Nobody panicked. Nobody suspected anything. While the plane circled above Seattle for 3 hours burning fuel, the FBI scrambled on the ground below. His demands had been radioed down from the cockpit. $200,000 in $20 bills, specifically $20 bills. He had thought about the weight. Larger bills weigh less but are harder to spend. Smaller bills would be too heavy for a parachute jump. $20 was the exact calculation of someone who had planned this down to the gram. And 4 parachutes. That demand for 4 parachutes was deliberate and brilliant. If he only asked for 1, the FBI might have given him a defective chute. By asking for 4, they assumed he planned to take a hostage with him and couldn't risk giving him anything that didn't work. He never planned to take anyone. He just needed a working parachute, and he needed the FBI to guarantee it was real. That level of thinking should have told investigators everything. At 5:24 p.m., the ground team radioed the pilot. The money was ready. The parachutes were ready. The plane landed in Seattle. Cooper allowed all 36 passengers to leave the aircraft in exchange for the money and parachutes. He was calm, almost polite. He tried to tip the flight attendants with money from his pocket, change from the drink he bought. They refused. He wasn't offended. This was a man completely under control of everything around him. With the passengers gone, Cooper ordered the crew to fly toward Mexico City. He gave the pilot specific instructions: keep the landing gear down, fly below 10,000 feet, reduce airspeed as much as possible. Precise, technical, the instructions of someone who understood exactly what aircraft can and cannot do. The plane took off at 7:40 p.m. into a dark, stormy night over Washington state. Sleet, heavy cloud cover, near zero visibility, outside temperature around -7 degrees Celsius at jump altitude, winds exceeding 200 miles per hour. These are not the conditions a sane person chooses to parachute into. At 8:13 p.m., the crew felt a pressure change in the cabin. The tail section moved upward briefly. The rear staircase, a unique feature of the Boeing 727, had been lowered from inside. Nobody went back to check. Cooper had told them to stay in the cockpit and not come out for any reason. At some point between Seattle and Reno, Nevada, over the dark wilderness of southwest Washington, Dan Cooper stepped out of a commercial aircraft at 10,000 feet into a freezing storm, with $200,000 strapped to his body, and was never seen again. The search began immediately, but the weather made it impossible that night. Thanksgiving morning, search teams flooded the forests of southwest Washington, hundreds of square miles of dense wilderness, rivers, mountains. The FBI used military aircraft, ground teams, everything available. Nothing. No body, no parachute, no trace. What they did find, and this detail matters, was the black J.C. clip-on tie Cooper had removed before jumping, left on his seat on the plane. That tie later provided investigators with a DNA sample. It has never matched anyone in any database, anywhere. Now, let's talk about who he might have been. Over 800 suspects were investigated. Most were eliminated quickly. A handful have never been fully ruled out. The most compelling suspect the FBI ever seriously considered was Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., a military veteran, Green Beret helicopter pilot, and experienced skydiver who, in April 2022, just 5 months after Cooper, hijacked the exact same type of aircraft using the exact same method, demanded ransom, demanded parachutes, jumped out over Utah. He was caught immediately because he left his fingerprints on a magazine. Another serious suspect was Kenneth Christensen, a former military paratrooper who had worked for Northwest Orient Airlines and therefore knew the aircraft intimately. 1 year after the hijacking, he bought a house in cash. He died in 1994. His brother came forward years later saying on his deathbed, Kenneth had admitted to something he couldn't repeat. Here is the truth about D.B. Cooper. He may have survived. The FBI has maintained for decades that the jump was almost certainly fatal. Unsuitable clothing, unsteerable parachute, freezing storm, dense forest. No experienced skydiver would have chosen those conditions. But an experienced skydiver would also not have used the less effective parachute while accidentally cannibalizing the only working backup chute for a money bag strap, which is exactly what Cooper did. Which suggests either he was not an experienced jumper and got extraordinarily lucky, or he was experienced enough to know something about that specific area that nobody else knew. In 2016, 45 years after the hijacking, the FBI officially closed the NORJAK investigation, citing resource allocation. They said their resources were better spent elsewhere. They have never said the case is solved. In July 2025, the FBI released a 398-page dossier on the investigation, everything they had, every suspect, every lead, every theory across 54 years of work. After 398 pages, the conclusion is the same as it was in 1971. They don't know who he was. They don't know if he survived. They don't know where the money went. He bought a $20 ticket. He drank a bourbon. He passed a note. And then he stepped off a plane into a storm over the Pacific Northwest and became the only person in the history of commercial aviation to pull this off and never be identified. Here is what I want you to think about. D.B. Cooper was not a ghost. He was a real man. He sat next to real people on a real plane. The flight attendants remember his face. He had a DNA profile on a tie. He had opinions about the weight of money. He knew things about Boeing 727s that most people don't know. He existed. He was specific. He was careful. And somewhere in the world, either in a grave nobody found or in a life nobody suspected, he took that secret with him. Drop one question in the comments. The detail that doesn't add up for you. The thing that keeps pulling at you about this case. Because the FBI had 45 years and 398 pages, and they still came up empty. Maybe the right question just hasn't been asked yet.